is Jeopardy!
I'll take workplace inequality for 200, Tony. Answer. It is projected to take until 2059 to close this disparity in income. How long will it take to close the gender pay gap in the United States? Correct, unfortunately. Okay, so I opened with a little bit of creativity there, but here are the cold hard facts. Women in the United States make 84 cents on the dollar as compared to men. This gap is even wider for women of color. Black women earn about 63 cents, and Latina women earn about 58 cents for every dollar earned by a white, non-Hispanic man. And if you look at certain industries, the story is even worse. For example, in financial management, it's 71 cents, and in retail sales, it's 72 cents. Mothers also face a motherhood penalty, where employers perceive them as less committed, resulting in lower wages or fewer promotions. Less money for the same job. Hard stop right here. There is no justification for this, and no projected timeline is fast enough. Seriously.
We got all things situated. The mathematics were calculated. I feel wasted and I feel jaded. The process here is so complicated. 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. Let's stay focused on a new step.
Hey all, it's Tony Volpicello, and this is the Career Jigsaw Podcast. Welcome back. It's time to continue part 2 of our episode, 3 Wise Women, Their Experience, Their Advice. So let's dive in with our next set of questions. Now let's start the second half of the episode by putting you on the advisory board of corporate America. What changes would you like to see corporate America make to create a more inclusive environment for women? Betsy, why don't we start with you?
Well, thanks, Tony. I think probably Cynthia and Anna can relate to some of the changes that have happened since we were starting our careers that have been terrific. I particularly think around maternity leave and parental leave. Really important to retain great talent and for companies to really understand that to retain the talent that the company needs and values, you need to understand what's going on in people's lives and be there and flex with that. So that's improved a lot and, of course, continues to need to be a top focus. I also think a lot about the culture. We often would talk at my company about culture eats strategy for lunch. And you hear, the subtle things that a culture is doing that aren't written down. I'll give an example from when I was at IBM, which was a phenomenal company. But it certainly was, when I was there, the best of the best in a lot of ways. But there was a culture that you were always on call. And it wasn't a mean-spirited thing at all. It was just what we did for each other. So if there were conference calls at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, that basically was just part of the culture. No one told you had to be on it. It was what you did. That's not something that should be challenged, and is not that helpful for working women or working men to really say, well, what was that unwritten rule that really began to burn people out or have a big impact on their health and happiness and their families. It's a funny story about IBM when I first started, and my first boss, who said to me something pretty important. It was a silly analogy, but it stayed with me for 45 years, so I'll share it. He said to me, Betsy, IBM is a big mud puddle. It's a huge mud puddle. And you're a finger, and you've come and joined us, and you're right in the center of that mud puddle. And sometimes the rings that you make are really significant. They might make it to the edge of the whole company and really make a difference. When you pull that finger out of the mud puddle, it's just going to go on. It's just going to go on. And I always love that silly story because it tells us you give everything you've got, and then you also know that it's going to be fine if you step back. So I bring that up because one of the things that my own children and their work experience are challenging me to think about is, hey, technology is advanced. There's a lot of things we can do differently. Why not consider a 4-day work week, for example? Why not think of ways that people can give and be effective and do their job with excellence and at top-notch performance? And has the world changed? So I think that's something that corporate America should also put on the agenda, to begin thinking through where and to what degree can you experiment with ideas like that or other ways that technology has allowed balance to come in.
Outstanding advice to get us started. The balance piece you just ended with, I think, is significant and does challenge corporate America. And to your earlier point, there's a difference between being all in and really committed to the company versus being there and available 24/7 like we're saving lives when we're not. So again, great advice to get us started. Anna, anything you would add?
Well, I love following Betsy because she's so detailed, which is wonderful. Just a couple of quick additions, and I would echo, I think corporate America's come a long way since when we started, and in many regards, mostly for the best. I would say, though, in the cultural aspect, I do think companies need people to be able to make mistakes more and be more forgiving about mistakes made. One of my bosses once said to me, I'm going to give you 3 chances and I'm not going to step in. You're going to fail. You know, you're going to make mistakes 3 times. On the 3rd time, I'll come in and help you out a little bit. But that was so important for me. Number 1, that he had my back, but number 2, that nothing was going to be fatal. And I do think that fear factor in screwing up sometimes holds people back, especially if people are from different cultures. So I'd like to see corporate America somehow culturally allow people to make more mistakes. That's the first thing. The second is, I do think companies can do a better job in recruiting, creatively recruiting, going to places that they didn't usually go to find talent. It starts, for me, with the talent that we bring in. And then to Betsy's point, how do you retain it? But I'm not sure, at least with the companies I was with, that we were as creative about our recruiting as we could have been, so that we would really bring in a very diverse group of individuals to work at the company.
Passionately agree about the recruiting piece. Getting more creative and more spread out in where you're recruiting from, I think, is significant. And then you mentioned that mistake piece, and I've said this in prior podcasts, but I'll say it again. We all know we learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. So why not go through them more and be in an environment where a company allows that without it being something you can't recover from? All right, let's talk about maybe a bit more of a sensitive and somewhat stressful topic for our listeners out there, and maybe even more so for women. How do you think women can effectively advocate for themselves when it comes to salary negotiations, promotions, or leadership opportunities? Cynthia, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thank you, Tony. I think women need to get so much better at this. This is such a hot button of mine. Women are offered a job, and this is a salary, and they say thank you and accept it. And when all of their male peers fight back for more money and more benefits. And it's like, why are women doing this? So salary negotiations, first of all, is fact-based. It's not emotional. You need to know your worth at all times. So the way I just feel so strongly that young women especially need to keep interviewing. It's not as if they get a job and they should just stay in the job. I don't care if you love your job, go out and interview, have a good relationship with a recruiter, and always know what your job is worth and what your competitors would consider paying you. And just going out to interview gives you so much information. And now salaries are published way more than they used to be, and it should be transparent in companies as well. But do your homework, really, really know what it is, and always ask for more. It's okay to. It doesn't mean that you don't like your job. It doesn't mean that you're greedy. It means that you know your worth, and that's important. In terms of selling yourself, again, interview, and know what you're good at. And I think doing jobs that, like Betsy was saying, in a sales role, do something that no one can ever take away from you. Because, when you're selling, your customer, you're winning or you're losing. No one can take that away from you later in your career. Do a P&L job, do a manufacturing management job, know those kind of things so that as you add to this, you're best for the next promotion. You know what you should do and you know how to advocate for yourself. But my biggest thing is just know your worth on the outside market.
I clearly touched a nerve. The passion is evident. I love it.
You sure did.
I think your advice is so spot on. And the interview piece not only helps you understand your worth, but let's face it, we all worked for big companies. It gives you ammunition to go back to that company and say, well, here's what others are willing to pay me. And listen, I'm married to a recruiter. The more information you have to be able to go back to the company and say, well, we wanted to pay X, this employee wants Y, and here's the circumstances around it, can only help, because we all know, you mentioned getting paid for what you're worth. There's not a company out there, generally speaking, that pays you exactly what you're worth. There's somewhere in between your worth and what they can get away with paying you, and the more you can do to push that envelope, the better. And I think you just gave all the women out there great advice.
And I think you have more leverage than you know. They've trained you. They've invested in you. Trust me, they do not want to lose you.
Max,
so push.
Exactly. You mentioned that word leverage. I think that's the key. I touched a nerve, but let me go to Betsy. Any more feedback on this, Betsy?
Well, I'm just going to take this a different angle, just for the fun of it. A couple things I think about in this, and it is a tricky area to do well. I think it's tricky to do this well and important. I think it's also important to realize it's not about you. It's about, as Cynthia said, it's about your value. It's about the work. What is it that you're going to do? It's not just like, look at me, or I've been here this long, therefore I should be making more money. Well, no. What are you doing? And what does that have? Why does that have more value to the company and to the outcomes and results of that company? And I think you have to also understand the culture of your company. And I'm talking to somebody who was at a very traditional company for over 35 years. And it was funny when I thought about this question, I was like, wow, I had a lot of management positions, a lot of leadership, many, many different kinds of teams. And not once in my whole over 30 years of management experience did someone negotiate salaries. I thought, I wonder if that's just one or what? And I went and talked to some of my peers, men, who also had years of management experience, international management roles, etc. Big, huge teams. Never once were they asked for salary. Now you'd say, well, people are cowards at IBM. No, I think actually in that culture, at that time, salaries were extremely transparent. As a company that was ahead of its time, they were transparent. You knew how the whole system worked. And you really needed to talk about, how am I contributing? What am I doing? How am I making more of a difference? How am I earning my way towards a leadership or a new level of responsibility? Because it was so transparent. So I just think as you make that message, and that's different when you're interviewing for a new job, I get that. But within a company, I think it's very important to talk about the value to the company. And I think it's important to understand the culture so that you ask effectively. And I'd also go back to kind of the asking. I've always loved the thought of inquiry over advocacy. I think it's much more powerful to ask a question than to advocate directly for yourself, which makes someone defensive. So it's just a little smart to maybe have a question about, I remember when I went to Year Up, which was the company after IBM, my wonderful mission-based organization, and I was going into sales, a sales role. And I'll be honest, I hope my boss isn't listening, but they offered me significantly more money than I thought they would. But I didn't want him to think he made a bad hire. So I politely asked, is that the best that can be offered? And he said, let me go work on that. So I started with a question, not a very sophisticated question, but a question. And he did come back with another offer. To be honest, it was mostly because I wanted him to know that I was going to be a really good person for him. more than the fact that I was disappointed with the salary. But it was an important lesson, and I think it's really important to use questions and to also think about the value that you're bringing and the responsibility you're taking on.
Well, clearly that there's an element there of don't sell yourself short. But then I loved your question because it wasn't a specific number. It wasn't a counteroffer. It was kind of what's the best you can do, or is this the best you can do, which really put an unknown but the ball back in their court to come back to you. So I love that tactical advice. And then your advice for corporate America, going back to how we kicked off the second half of this episode around transparency, creates a very different culture. And Anna and I worked for a company, the same company, where it wasn't always clear about what your overall compensation opportunity was. And that always felt a bit weird in our culture. So being able to be more transparent about that, I think clearly has its place in corporate America. We've talked about workplaces so far like they are a one-size-fits-all. We've touched on this topic a bit, but I'd like to go further. In your experiences, how do workplace cultures vary between male-dominated industries and more diverse environments? And what impact do you think this has on women's experiences? And why don't we start with Betsy?
Well, thanks, Tony. I could generalize off of this one to say anytime a workplace is more monolithic, that's a problem. Because you've ever been aware of the people that you hang out with? Maybe you remember back to high school, those wonderful days, and the crowd that you hung out with, maybe even early adulthood. The norms they had started to become your norms. And you don't see things as clearly when you're within a bubble. That becomes the norm. And that I think creates a lot of blind spots. And so whether it's a male-dominated culture, a female-dominated culture, an old-dominated culture, whatever it might be, I think when there's that majority view, which most organizations have some majority view, you need to explicitly look for and solicit the minority, the other groups' views and opinions on things to be the strongest company and culture that you can be. Thought about a story that just gives an example of this. It was someone who came to speak at my company, an investment banker. And the thing that resonated and stayed with me was her observation of the companies that came to pitch to them for money. And her observation was that the ones that were male-led and male-dominated would come in and talk about how great their idea was, where it was going, how it was going to change industry, how much money they were going to make, how profitable it was, how competitive it was. The women-led companies with more of a women leadership team would have the same strong kind of company, but would come in and talk about who their competitors were and how they might deal with it, what some of their challenges were in their development process and what they were doing about that. They would look at things they had to fix in order to make that vision happen. Well, what I hear in that is you need both. Yes, men stereotypically might be more bravado and forward-looking. Women might be more collaborative and looking at where they can mitigate risks. You need both. And I think that's really what I would think we need to aggressively and distinctly and specifically look for, is including, seeking out, making a place for other voices and other leaders to get to good decisions.
Great insight. I could not agree more. And I think that spurs a whole other set of questions for another time. But let's stay on topic. Cynthia, any feedback you want to add to that question?
Yes, I think Betsy covered it very, very well. A few years ago, I was brought into I would call it very male-dominated industry that as a board member, they asked me to help with the women and starting, a little women's group so people could talk to each other and things. So I got involved with the workforce and I realized, okay, if everybody is wearing a Patagonia vest with the company's logo on it and all these men look exactly the same, these young men, and these women can't break through it. And I realized that, I went back and did my report to the board, and said, you need to hire more women and you need to get women managers. You need to change this up. And it's not just for the women, it's also for these poor men in the Patagonia vest. It has to change because I think that the cultures need to be agile. And I think when you have diversity, you have more teamwork. I think there's more fun. And I also think that it's less competitive and people's self-esteem grows far more. So these women working in this company were having a miserable time. And then 2 years later, they had 3 women in management roles, and the culture was completely different. It was so everybody was happier.
Well, this is what happens when you bring 100+ years of experience to a podcast. You get great insight from extremely competent and experienced leaders. So thank you for that.
Just hoping you don't have a Patagonia vest on.
I do not, but thank you for the shout out. I appreciate it. Let's shift gears a tiny bit because we've talked a lot so far. And I think what we've talked about is how women can handle things in the workplace. And honestly, it's not just about what women can do differently. So my question is pretty simple. What role do men and male allies play in supporting gender equality in the workplace? And how can they be more involved? And let's go to Anna for that one.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, this falls in the category of mentorship, I think. I think allies are really important, just as mentors can be very important. And yes, having male allies are important, but also having very successful women allies in your organization are just as important. And so building those relationships, I think, are critical. And there are a number of things that allies can do in the moment to really make a difference for your career, both in terms of giving you credibility in your role, but also promoting and advocating for you in new roles around the organization. And so the way to approach that, or the way that I've approached that, is to be very specific with somebody that I felt would be an important ally for me, both men and women, again. And similar to the mentorship, having them comment on your development plan, having them think about and comment and advise on your career path, being very specific about feedback in a meeting when you are speaking, and things that they can do to promote the suggestions that you might be making. But I also think it's important, and people forget this, that an ally also speaks to an alliance. And an alliance goes 2 ways. That there are things that you as an individual can be doing to also be an ally for that individual as well. And I think that's really important. And one of those things is to demonstrate what an ally does for each other. So are there things that you're doing to bring junior people up, and ways that you are encouraging and promoting and advocating for others in your organization? Demonstrating how a strong alliance or an ally can be critical for the organization and the operation that you're working in. Those are ways for me that an ally is important to the well-rounded work of the operation you're in.
Well, I love the reinforcement of the mentor and the mentorship and the role, but I love even more how you talked about almost an evolution from a mentor to an alliance and an ally. In my mentorships, when I was fortunate enough to mentor somebody, I actually viewed it more as an alliance, where not only what was my responsibility to help you, but I'm going to utilize you to help me and be in this together. And I think the evolution of mentor to ally is something to really think differently about. So again, great feedback, and your experience is clearly helping our listeners today. Cynthia, same question. Let's talk about men in the workplace, what they can do differently to be an ally, a support, and move equality forward.
Okay, thanks, Tony. It seems clear at this point that in companies where men are working really hard to support gender equality, the business results are superior. I think it's been proven over the past 10 years with studies So I think men need to understand, particularly to younger people, you're in the boat, you made it into the boat. Give the other person a hand, like work to do that. Be as a leader, be as authentic as you possibly can. Let your vulnerability show, because those vulnerabilities are human. They're not necessarily male or female. But if managers act that way and show that vulnerability, I think that it promotes more equality. I think men have to work very hard to promote diverse management teams. And I think that we all have to actively just stamp out barriers and not sit back and let things, well, that's the way things are. No, that's not okay. Do something, because your business results depend on it.
Really, 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 really well said. Of course, you linked it back to the business results in a different way and the role that men can play, but that diversity of team, that diversity of management style could not be overstated more. So great feedback. Thank you for that. All right, let's focus a little bit more on maybe a smaller group, and that's the new to workforce group. So what advice would you give to young women entering the workforce today, especially around overcoming obstacles and seizing opportunities? So let's start with Betsy.
Thanks, Tony. I think about this and I think about it's what you do and it's how you do it as both being really important. So when I think about early career women, what you do, you got the job. Show up with your best. Bring your best to that job and show up strong. They saw something in you see something in yourself. Take every opportunity that comes along. What you do, and embrace the change and raise your hand. And look for those opportunities that, you don't know quite how to do it, but lean into it. That's how you grow. And there'll be a lot of people to help you as you grow. So that's what you do. And how you do it is just as important. I really have learned this. I wish I learned it earlier in my career. How you do it is to be very trustworthy. How you do it is to help others, to really have a hand at their back and be kind. And how you do it is to ask questions. As you're learning something, ask questions. People want you on the team. They want you to succeed. They know things. So use that, ask questions, and build your network that way as well. So I think of both those as two very important parts of how you show up well in your early career. Doing what you do with excellence, and how you do it really showing your character.
Excellence and character, wholeheartedly agree. Anna, what would you like to add?
Just really quickly, Tony, Betsy made a comment, they hired you for a reason. I would start with embrace your uniqueness. I mean, she's absolutely right. You were hired for a reason. And for women, yes, we are different than men. That's the reality. And we bring, to Cynthia's point about the impact, the positive impact we have on the business, we're brought on so that we can make that impact. Embrace that. Lead forward with that, for sure. The second thing is be cognizant, to Betsy's point, it's what you do and how you do it. I would add on to that, you're also being evaluated not just on what you say, but what you don't say sometimes. It's not just what you do, but what you don't do sometimes, and what you raise your hand for and what you don't raise your hand for. So think about and be aware that you are being evaluated on your whole person, not just what you do, but what you don't do as well. And then finally, you're listening, folks are listening to this to think about how they can advance their career. I would emphasize that what you're looking for others to do for you, you should be doing for others as well. So if mentorship is important to you, if an alliance is important to you, advocacy is important to you, be cognizant of what you're doing in return to set those examples, especially for junior people within your organization.
Damn, you ladies are good. You almost make me want to unretire. This is fantastic. So, Anna, great feedback. I love the kind of evaluation piece, and not only what you are doing, but what you aren't doing, and that you are being looked at and evaluated constantly, but overall just terrific feedback. All right, that ends the formal Q&A portion of this week's episodes. So before we wrap, I'd like to give each of you a chance to just share any final thoughts you might have on today's topic. So let's start with Cynthia.
Thank you, Tony. I think my final thought would be to have each of the people listening to this understand that you are just fine, just the way you are. Keep trying, keep at it. Of course you have weaknesses. Of course you have questions. Of course there's things you don't know what to do. But by the very fact that you're listening to this podcast means you know what it is. So also understand that you are really, really just okay, just being yourself.
Great, simple, straightforward advice. Love it. Betsy, let's go to you.
Well, that's pretty spot on right there. Thank you, Cynthia. I think a couple of things come to mind. I'll squeeze in two. One is your career's a long time. There'll be a lot of phases to it. At one point I was loaned out as an executive to the Boston school systems. Another time I was in a consulting group. Another time I was able to take an encore career to feed my heart as well as my brain. So know that and embrace all those things that come your way. And it's really about your life. So probably my final thought would be, one many people have heard before, but it's the final line of a Mary Oliver poem called A Summer Day, which simply says, tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life, because each day is really a gift.
That is awesome. Anna, no pressure, but bring us home.
Yeah, I'm going to change what I said before. I don't like following Betsy.
I can see why.
No, she's a good friend. And so really well said. Take the long view, to Betsy's point. But I would just add quickly, be positive. Think about the kind of people you like to be around. And at the end of the day, a lot of the decisions that are made about putting people in roles is about the person that they want around them, right? And people like to be around positive people. And so think about how you present yourself on a regular basis and be the kind of person that you want to be around. So with that, thank you, Tony. Echoing Cynthia, this is just a really a great podcast, and the things that you're doing to help people with their careers, I think, is really meaningful. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Anna, Betsy, Cynthia. You made it. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to help our listeners by sharing your experiences and your advice. I'll be the first to admit this topic at best is a work in progress, and my hope is that together we did a little bit to help move it forward. I appreciate you being open and candid. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Okay, Your Honor, here's my closing argument. Pay women the same as men for the same job. Women will take home more to their families, the economy wins, and everyone wins. Women, stand up for yourselves. Yes, it sucks that we're at where we're at with equality, but no one is going to fight for you more than you. Men, stop sitting on the sidelines admiring the problem. Get in there and be part of the solution. Everyone, broaden your thinking and imagine a time when we don't have to talk about the percentage of this or the percentage of that everyone has a voice, everyone shares power, and inequality is something for the history books. But in this, we have a shared responsibility. All right, that's our show. If you like what you heard, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and now YouTube. Yes, we have our own YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. This is Tony Volpicello. We are the Career Jigsaw. Be safe, all.